So it's very good to see you. You're very welcome, Chamber Partners, to our Thought Leader Council session today. And we're delighted to have John Coleman, the Chief Executive of the Land Development Agency, with us, and he's on there now. So John, good to have you with us, and we'll talk to you in a little while. It's good to be looking at you on screen. It would have been far better to be talking to all of you from what we had originally planned on doing, which was we would have at this point been down at up on the top of the new Penrose building, and overlooking the Docklands, where John would have been speaking to us about the development of the Docklands from an LDA perspective, and we would have been then heading across the street to the Dean for a nice lunch, where actually we had Matt Ryan, who's the COO of the McKillen Group and the Press Up Group, who are the developers of the Dean and the full range of hospitality sector. We had him lined up to speak after lunch as well. So unfortunate that we could not get there today, but I suppose those are the times we're in for a little while. So good to have you with us, and we'll over the next 55 minutes or so hope to get as close as we possibly could or can to what would have been a great in-person session. So maybe a little bit of housekeeping as usual. You're all familiar. We'll try and keep the mics off as we move along. I think considering the numbers, and if you're comfortable, try and leave those cameras on. I think it's good for people to engage and to see fellow chamber partners and Thought Leader Council members. We are recording the session, just I suppose from an archive point of view for ourselves to understand and go back over in terms of what has been said. And in that regard, also just be conscious of these sessions are held in under Chatham House rules. Okay, so that hopefully will facilitate a bit of open engagement and conversation, maybe a little bit later on when we get to the Q&A with John at the end. And in that regard, also use the chat box to put in any questions that you may have as we go along. So and we'll get to that in a little while. So maybe next up today, can I introduce to you someone you know well, Thomas McCure, Director of Public Affairs. And Thomas is going to just take you through an update across all of our public affairs and advocacy activity and what's been happening since we last met. And he's got a presentation lined up on that. And again, feel free if you have any questions that you have across that presentation as well. It's been a hugely active period over the last while, and you would have all have received this publication over the last number of weeks, which is the autumn update for our Thought Leaders Council. So a huge amount of information in there. I'm sure Thomas will touch on some of that now as he goes through his presentation. So over to you, Thomas.
Thanks very much, Conor. And look, what I'm going to do for the next 15 minutes or so is talk you through, I suppose, a whistle-top tour of what we've been focusing on this year, provide some insights on what we think is important for the months ahead, and really give a good holistic overview of our advocacy activities. So I'll just make sure I have my slides shared. Can I get a thumbs up from someone that's visible? That's great. Yeah. So look, well, thank you very much for joining us today. All of our advocacy activity passes through a filter to make sure that it is compliant with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are signed up in a very, very formal way to support those. We have selected 5 that we think we can be most impactful on. And I'm going to talk you through our activity, which is aligned to that. And what I wanted to start with today is the priorities of this grouping specifically. And very, very pleased to have had a very, very strong opening session in March this year, where we validated, I suppose, what people felt were the priorities of the grouping. So things like the economic recovery, making sure that was resilient, making sure that was sustainable, international and regional connectivity, housing and apartment delivery, which I'll touch on and John will go into in some detail, championing issues relevant to Cork, climate and sustainability, mixed mobility, public realm, and celebrating success and positivity. So what I'm going to do is go through a few things that are covered off in those. And just to say, very, very proud to be a member of the Cork Chamber team, and our public affairs team maintains a very, very strong advocacy activity level. We are the most active regional lobby group in the country. And in terms of the lobby register, there's a couple of national organisations that come ahead of us. And when we put our lobby returns together with our colleagues in Chambers Ireland and our colleagues across the Chamber network, we would be the strongest advocacy grouping in the country. Now, just to say thank you very much to everybody who contributes to our economic trends. I just wanted to highlight, usually we go by quarter with this, obviously, but what I want to do here is, rather than dwell on where we're at right now, is just to show some of the very, very important proof points that came out that influenced us this year. Infrastructural investment here, again, pandemic, education and skills. So you can see there again, there's another layer of validation of what we're focused on. Interestingly, the well-being framework as a way of measuring our success. So we've got things like GDP, GNI, all sorts of, I suppose, maybe traditional manners of recognizing economic success. Our members, 91% of them feel that a well-being framework should be part of that. It has been adopted in New Zealand, and it's certainly something that we've taken on board as regards what type of lobbying we're doing. Are we supporting things that would score Ireland well on a well-being framework? Very interesting pieces around international connectivity here. We actually have an event coming up with Cork Airport where we'll be able to get into that in quite a lot of detail. But needless to say, there is appetite to return, massive consumer appetite. Business appetite might take a little bit longer to get there in totality, but there's a positive trajectory ahead, but I think one that will require work. And then finally, something that's very, very relevant to our housing agenda is that, again, like, there's a massive level of support for government to introduce time-bound tax measures to stimulate more urban accommodation. And I would say that commentary is not limited to tax incentives, it's limited to anything that mobilizes brownfield development. So I actually want to move straight onto that topic and to talk about some of the activity we've had. So just to throw back to 2019, when we did a report with the Construction Industry Federation and EY, at that point in time, there was almost no acknowledgement in government that there was a viability issue for brownfield sites. There would have been casual and unencouraging commentary around, maybe developers aren't efficient enough, maybe this is why it can't be constructed. But there was a very poor understanding of the breakdown as regards why things weren't happening. We spelt it out then, we categorically showed the case, and put in train, I suppose, a conversation around private sector delivery of brownfield accommodation. Moving on to 2021, we wanted to kind of revisit that, pull out some international case studies, look at what's been doing elsewhere, as I say, for the private delivery of apartments to bolster our city region, to make sure that our urban areas are thriving, to make sure that there's places for the talent that's coming into the city region to live, to make sure that we stack up on an international comparative context as regards how much apartment availability we have in the country. So we conducted this report. There's 5 recommendations there. If I broke them down in the most simplest way, tax is a major inhibitor of viability. That needs to be addressed. The urban regeneration funds are very, very, very important. They need to be delivered on the ground. I think there's very, very strong commitments to Cork. That now needs to be realised. And the other 3 measures that are there are how I would just lump them in for the purpose of the concept, is things that will make access to capital cheaper. So those are three of the very significant overheads that are encountered, and we believe, based on the work we've done with the CIF and KPMG Future Analytics, that is something that if each of those 3 was tackled in a very meaningful way, we would have a very positive pathway ahead for urban accommodation. Just to say, there's massive national policy support for this. Throwing back, those first 3 national policy objectives are from the National Development Plan. I'm sure John might touch on them a little bit later, but there's massive policy direction to do this. Housing for All tackles it potentially to a degree with the introduction of the Croí Cónaithe fund, which could help to alleviate. So rather than tackling necessarily the tax end of things, government are going the other way at it in terms of providing the equivalent of a grant or program that will alleviate some of the costs. So it's same concept, coming at the same means, but from a different direction of travel. Very interesting to see how that pans out. And that's to be launched in Q4 this year, which I think is a very tight timeline for the department, and we would be hopeful that they could meet that. And then just to say, in the mix of all that, You've got the Office of the Planning Regulator, who are doing their job to make sure that the national policy guidelines to the left there are adhered to. There's no doubt that that's best planning policy, that is the way, like the benchmark, right way to develop our city regions. But with the challenge on delivery on the ground, with the challenge on viability, there would be maybe a level of concern, which is carefully considered, that if we're overly strict and stringent as regards meeting those targets from a zoning perspective, that we won't deliver the level of housing that's required in the region. So what you have here is very, very strong, correct ideology butting heads with actual viability on the ground, and the OPR are in the midst of all of that, and having their say, and we're working to best understand how we can positively influence that agenda with stakeholders throughout Cork to make sure that the level of housing that's required is delivered over the period of the next development plans. The infrastructure is immensely important. I think going back to that well-being index, CMATS is it in a nutshell. If this can be delivered, Cork will be utterly transformed in terms of how people move around the city, therefore how they live their lives in the city region. Massive positivity around the dual tracking from Middleton, the signalling. There's a €187 million package there that Irish Rail are drawing down from the EU, which is tremendous, and I'll say why. That was previously at the very back of CMATS. It's arguably, of the three big ticket projects, Bus Connects, Light Rail and Commuter Rail, the one that would most easily get through planning. We'll be very, very hopeful that can be realised over the next couple of years. So that's a big step forward for CMATS. Bus Connects is out to consultation. We expect the Light Rail to be out to consultation early next year. There's great steps being made on cycling. The Dunkettle interchange is motoring ahead. And actually, if anyone's particularly interested in Dunkettle interchange, be in touch with us. We have a specific event for our Little Island members on that, and anybody who'd be interested would, of course, be invited this Thursday. So look, CMAT's very positive direction travel. I think the main thing now over the next 12 months will be seeing, relative to the lifespan of this plan, are we hitting enough KPIs to make sure that it's delivered at the point at which it is to draw to a close. So huge potential there. I think then, that's a massive capital program, so it's very appropriate to look at the NDP. So a lot of speculation in the run up to the NDP. We did a lot of advocacy in the run up to the NDP. It is a massively important document for the future of the country as regards stabilizing the economy from a construction and infrastructure perspective, as regards actually delivering a decent future for the people who live here now and who are growing up here. You can see the trajectory there is very, very positive, moving up to 5% GNI, and then holding that, which is very, very positive. So there's no fluctuation, which I think is worth pointing out in its own right. Huge spending increase there, which is very, very welcome. The funding, the full funding spend envelope is 165 billion. I would say the main issue will not be around getting projects funded. I think it's around getting projects through planning to a point at which they can be funded. And I think that's where we're focusing a lot of our time at the moment, around that judicial review reform to make sure it's faster and better suits the delivery of infrastructure. This is a very important slide because it sets out the growth trajectory for each of the 5 city regions. So you can see the percentage points for Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford are bigger than they are for Dublin. Cork, by virtue of its scale, will be the fastest growing out of those, equaling about equivalent to the other next 3 city regions put together. What's concerning here, and you can see it, the southern region is getting about the funding it should do in order to meet its growth trajectory, but you can see there's a big gap relative to how cities are being funded relative to their growth trajectory versus how towns, villages, and rural are being funded. So again, this information is in the NDP. There is tremendous stats, there's tremendous information in there. That chart would want to be changing over the next number of years. Then I just think this is a very, very fascinating table. I wouldn't be one for throwing massive tables of stats at anyone in a presentation, but the reason I just want to highlight this to say here is the departmental capital expenditure trajectory over the next number of years. And what I think is to be played for, or to be debated, decided, is what are those allocations. There's no doubt that the Secretary Generals and the departments have an idea of where that goes, but I think it's on the business community needs to have its say to ensure that where it is being allocated is as impactful as possible. And then, of course, a nod to our very, very positive relationship with the European Union there, which I won't dwell on other than to note it today. We've also got a very, very progressive Sustainable Cork program that we're working through, that we launched in the middle of the pandemic, when we realized that you, our members, didn't only want us to be talking about business supports, that we needed to be talking about the future of what the region looked like, and that has to be a sustainable future if we're to be competitive. We have here some of the topics we've touched on this year, everything from arts to climate action. We launched an SEAI pilot program where we took 12 companies through the first ever real strong TLC SEAI program, circular economy training. We sponsored this tremendous initiative in Cork City Centre, 300 trees planted in the city there with Test Site. The Sustainable Cork Fund is delivered for 125 participants and delivered very, very substantially for some very, very worthy awardees. Our diversity and inclusion, we've ramped that up. We have written to government seeking stronger hate crime protection for people who are subject to racist, any form of racist encounter. We've surveyed our members and found that there's massive space for improved formal training in the space of D&I. And we've done everything we can to continue to progress very, very constructive and meaningful relations with people like the Cork Migrant Centre. We continue to build momentum with bringing students in to make sure that they can engage with this topic. And there's nobody has more passion for sustainability, trust me, than the people who are coming out of our universities right now. What I want to highlight here is a very, very strong report that we put together in 2020 that has now been followed up by a very, very strong report by GNI, KPMG and Devonish. And that we now have a situation where I would argue 12 months ago, there was very few politicians who knew what biogas was. And now here we have cabinet members visiting some tremendous facilities in West Cork. There are headwinds and there are challenges, and Equinor departing from the Irish market last week is a tremendous blow potentially to the renewable sector unless it is addressed. There is very good potential to address it. I think what's interesting about this slide is you can see the big terrifying headline of a major FDI player leaving our market, but then on the other side you can see offshore wind to hydrogen project launched. Irish utility proposing to build 2 floating wind farms in Scotland. So you can see, despite this, there's a direction of travel and momentum. We've done a lot of work this year with stakeholders. We launched a very significant report this year. We've made a very, very strong best foot forwards in terms of engaging with government on it. And what I've sought to do here is just to highlight some of the things that need to happen. The scale of this can be absolutely immense. There's no doubt about that. Floating offshore wind needs an increased target. It needs a better res allocation. That's the actual funding mechanism through which it goes through. We need all of the kind of, dare I say it, the boring, dull things to happen, like the regulations to be in place. We need better resourcing in the departments. For green hydrogen, we actually need a national target and a national strategy. It can take infinite excess energy from offshore wind and turn it into hydrogen, which can be stored and deployed and sold internationally. It needs robust regulation. I think the main point about all this, there's momentum building around all of this, but it's, can we tackle this with the same gusto that we tackled COVID? Can that same level of urgency be brought to climate crisis as has been brought to COVID? Again, biomethane, it's easily the hardest to explain, least glamorous form of renewable energy, but it has a massive role to play in decarbonizing our farms and providing very, very strong, very, very viable blend onto the grid, which can be sustained right now by any of the technology in our homes, but which needs appropriate better regulation and better incentives in place. COP26, a huge set piece, obviously, for global leaders. But I think what's interesting in parallel to that is we have our own climate action plan. So look, there's a direction of travel is very positive in the country. A 51% reduction is enshrined in legislation. We just need to think bigger, move faster, and not be afraid to be led in a very exciting way by the private equity that is being pumped into the renewable sector, which can massively deliver if we can get the regulatory and supportive environments in place. So look, that's certainly, I think, a whistle-stop tour of where our focus is. We believe that if the elements that are described there can be put together, that the future will be very, very strong, very, very resilient, and very, very positive for the region in which all of you operate. And there's not a day goes by that our team aren't working to drive those agendas forward as best we can. So thank you very much for your ongoing support, and thank you for your time today.
Okay, great, Thomas. Thank you very much for that great update. A huge amount to get through there in a short period of time. And again, for all of those on the call, any questions or any queries on that, please come back to any of us on the team to follow up there. I suppose what's really important is that we're continuing to progress and action across the priority areas identified by our partners. Some of those can be short to medium term. Many of those are certainly medium to long term, but it's hugely important that we continue to engage with government, relevant agencies and so on to see progress, because it all goes towards building the best possible business environment here across the Cork region. So next, can I introduce Chamber President Paula Cogan. Good afternoon, Paula.
Hi, Conor. Good afternoon. Thomas, you reflected on the passion for D&I that exists within third level graduates at the moment, but can I say within Cork Chamber it is a passion as well, and thank you for that, Thomas. And it was a whistle-stop tour, but I know from personal experience the amount of work that's gone into this agenda in the last year or so as well. For me, I think it's interesting. It's the joining up the dots piece. So all of us involved in this call are looking for talent attraction. We want to win the best people to work in our organizations, and I suppose again today's news and young employers and employees going back to the home situation for the next few months, we know isn't ideal. But again, adding up those pieces there, if you have a city that has an amazing cityscape, if you have fantastic sustainable living and urban areas, then of course you're going to attract the best and the brightest. And it all really fits into our mental health and well-being as well, and ensuring that we continue to deliver. So again, it's the interesting piece as you've done there, Thomas, COP26, transport and infrastructure, but mental health and well-being as important, I would suggest, as part of that whole agenda as well. So again, I'm standing between John and the rest of you, and unfortunately we didn't even get to have a bite to eat together this afternoon. We should have sent out a little pack to you in advance, but thank you all for joining us as well, and really looking forward to John's comments.
Great, thanks very much, Paula. So, okay, let's move on and introduce John here. As I said at the outset, John is Chief Executive of the Land Development Agency. He's been in that role since its inception in September 2018. He previously held senior roles with NAMA. He worked extensively on the setup of its residential delivery division at that time, and he was also the Chief Financial Officer. He's a graduate of UCD with a BCom and is also a chartered accountant, and prior to joining NAMA in 2011, he worked in banking and accountancy. So John, good afternoon, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Conor, and thanks also to the President and Thomas and for having me here today. Pity I was looking forward to getting down last night and having a good night's rest, but alas, it didn't transpire. So at least we can do it online.
Well, absolutely, and it's great to have you online with us today. And I know you do like to get down to Cork when you can. You've got big plans and it's a big part of your focus. And look, maybe just we'll move on and just maybe allow you to I know you have a presentation to go through, and we want to allow some time for questions after that as well. So John, I'll let you get on with that presentation, and we'll come back to you at the end.
Thanks very much, Conor. I appreciate that, and I'll just attempt to share my screen now. But essentially, what I'm going to talk to you about today is that a lot of your members mightn't know too much about the LDA. So I'll just give you a quick update as to where we've got to in those 3 years that you mentioned since September 2018, or really early 2019 when we formed our board. And a little bit about our we have a dual focus, a short-term focus and a longer-term focus. Our approach to affordable housing, specific aspects of how we can hopefully help make a difference in Cork, and then other areas for collaboration going forward as to how we can try and accelerate and overcome some of the obstacles that we have in the nearer term. So just a quick snapshot. So from zero, we were released as a concept really back in late 2018. So since then, we've built the organization up. We've 60 staff now, mainly architects, surveyors, project managers, legal people, procurement is a big thing for us, of course, as well. So we have an office based here in Dublin. We have a commitment to set up an office in Cork and Limerick, and in fact, in Cork, the Cork City Council and Doherty has very gracefully facilitated some office space for us there as an interim measure until we can hopefully post-COVID establish a more permanent presence in Cork. We're working on projects through the development process, which is either in design or with the planning authorities or planning approved for around 6,000 homes. And we have just announced through Housing for All additional land capacity for an additional 21,000 homes, or to bring our total capacity to 21,000 homes. An additional private sector partnerships initiative that we have just launched called Project Tusig, which is the Irish for start or initiate, targets the delivery of another 5,000 affordable homes, and we're hoping that we'll have opportunities to deploy that into Cork City as well as that process commences. So really, what is the LDA? In short, we're two things. In the short term, we're delivering on state lands and hopefully other lands for affordable housing to get housing delivered as quickly as possible. Obviously, we have a housing need right now, and we're doing everything that we can to get affordable housing delivered on all lands. In the longer term, we're trying to assemble large-scale strategic areas, so coherent land assembly, like you will have seen in other European jurisdictions, and I'll give some examples of those as well. So it's a short-term and a long-term. We've structured ourselves internally accordingly to deliver on those two mandates. So in terms of the progress that we've made since the outset, so we've grown the land portfolio quite significantly up to 26,000. A good chunk of that is longer term in nature, but as I mentioned, around 6,000 at least is deliverable in the short term. If you take 0 to 5 years has been short term. Those strategic areas that I mentioned, we now have 6 on our books, which quite a significant amount is in Cork, which I'll touch on later on. We have planning consents for around 860 homes, again, some of which is in Cork, and ready to develop sites of 2. So the thing about that, and it's one of the challenges that we face at the moment, is the planning system. So those numbers, where we have quite a big land portfolio, translating that into planning consents that are implementable is a challenge, as we all know at the moment, and hopefully one that will be addressed through planning reform, as Thomas touched on. We can't go without mentioning our approach to sustainability as well. We're taking the attitude that sustainability is no longer just a nice to have; it's a requirement. So we have employed a strategic sustainability manager to drive the sustainability agenda of the LDA. Some of the ways that we're seeing that transpire is a focus in terms of land targeting around transport orientation. So that's on transport nodes, train stations, especially. We want to get to a higher density. Again, challenges in the planning system on that, but that's where we focus our targeting too. And then also in the construction, the operation of homes that we're involved in, we want to focus on sustainability. And I guess a good calling card is one of the largest passive house standard schemes in Europe. Shangana in Dublin is going to be, that's out to tender at the moment, is going to be built to passive house standard. So this gives you a graphical illustration of where our site portfolio is at the moment for the 6,000 homes that we're in the development process, and some of the strategic areas that we're active on at the moment. There's quite a bit in Dublin, and we are looking to broaden our impact in other non-Dublin cities, and particularly in Cork, of course, with the growth potential that there is there. And I'll touch on that in a moment as well in terms of land that we're targeting down there. So the infill projects that we're working on are denoted by the houses there. So that would be development projects that are deliverable in the near term, and the skyscraper icons denote the strategic areas that we're working on. So just to give you a sense of what does the short term mean, one that you'll all be familiar with is St. Kevin's Hospital. So it's been a bit of a blight on the horizon in Cork for a number of years. It's obviously been set on fire. It's derelict at the moment. We're out to tender at the moment for enabling works to commence in Q1 next year on that site, to clear the site, demolition and site preparation. And we're about to release the building works tender out to the contractor market, hopefully in the next couple of weeks as well. So we're hoping that that is a good statement of intent in terms of the delivery of homes in Cork, and to try and prove that it is possible to deliver them. The next one that we have coming online is Shangana Castle in Dublin, which is around 600. We're out to tender on that at the moment to contractors, so we hope to get shovels in the ground in middle of summer, probably next year. The longer term, so what does that mean? So it's essentially designating or drawing a line around larger scale strategic areas that require more than just design and planning to require infrastructure and other unlocking solutions to bring them to life. There's some really obvious ones in Cork, of course. There's the Docklands area, and which will probably follow that is the Tivoli Docks area. And so trying to come up with solutions as to how to bring those forward is big part of the LDA's remit, and is a longer term aspect of it. We have others around the country. We've just released a master plan for Colbert Station in Limerick, and I'll just talk about that from a conceptual perspective to see what's possible and to show you our approach there. We've also working on one for Sandy Road in Galway, and the digital hub in Dublin, which is right beside the Guinness brewery, and is probably equivalent in terms of the Diageo regeneration project that's right beside it there. So there are a number of these, and there are others that we'd like to bring forward next year. So our approach in Limerick was to appoint master planning architects for a 69-hectare site, about 46 of that developable. It's right on the train station. It's mainly in legacy uses, and to come up with a vision and a master plan for the development. It's clearly a 20-25 year project. However, by breaking it down into districts and eating the elephant in bites is going to be our approach. It's out to consultation at the moment. We want to hear what the public have to say about it, but we're targeting the development or the lodging of development of a design and lodging of a planning application in late 2022, to progress the design early 2023 to make a planning lodgement, because one of the things that we want to do is to prove by catalytic development that these areas can be successful. That's going to be helped in no small part by the commitment of the government to transfer lands, all the lands as required down at the Colbert area into the LDA. So what does it look like? It's nearly 50 hectares of developable land. We think about 2,800 homes, and we're focused on sustainability, so limiting car traffic, taking advantage of the transport infrastructure that's there, and having some iconic type recognizable development called Limerick Link right through the centre of it, which is a kind of a cycleway pedestrian boulevard. So it's really to push this 15-minute city concept where you have a live-work proposition that's really interesting, I think, to potential employers. So that's the nub of what we're promoting in Limerick. But obviously we're not here to talk about Limerick, but I think there are similar opportunities in Cork as well that we should be promoting. Some of the inspiration from these we've got from Europe, some more advanced than others. There's a master plan for Nordhavn in Copenhagen, and there's a more established longer term one that's been in place for a number of years in Hafen City in Hamburg. But essentially it's where the state, through the municipality or a dedicated agency, designated an area, drew a line around it, created an implementation plan, created a planning scheme, a planning framework, and essentially made serviced, when I mean service by transport infrastructure and other utility services like water and electricity, service plots that were developable, de-risked, and ready for development. So that would be the aim, say for instance in Limerick Colbert as well. So from Cork City's perspective, Thomas has covered more eloquently than I could in terms of the growth ambition for Cork, but clearly it's very significant, and the LDA wants to play a significant role in supporting that as well. So this idea of the 15-minute city concept and bringing forward brownfield development I think the state and the LDA can play a significant role in that. Two key areas of focus for us are the City Docks area. We've set up a delivery office with Cork City Council in relation to that. And also Tivoli Docks, which is probably longer term, which has a number of challenges, but the government has announced that will transfer in due course to the LDA to bring that along as well. And I think the opportunity to lever the strengths of those respective sites is massive. They are longer term, but I think we have to start somewhere, and trying to jump on the wave of infrastructure development spending that you'll have seen outlined in the National Development Plan, I think is going to be critical to advancing those as well. So let's take advantage of that. So from the LDA's perspective, we do want to support plan-led growth, and we're obviously keeping a close eye on the development plan. We do want to optimize state lands to support that, and the catalytic effect, I think, of the brownfield regeneration opportunities that are a challenge, and they're undoubtedly a challenge, and there's viability issues and so on. I think the LDA should be focusing very clearly on those to try and support activity there. So that's why we've set up a Docklands delivery office with Cork, and that's why we're looking at other initiatives that will help that agenda as well. More specifically, what are we looking at in Cork? Well, what has been agreed for in Housing for All has been the transfer of sites, a big strip in the Cork Docklands, the Marina Power Station and the Bordnamona site at the back of it. Tivoli Docks has been agreed as well. There's a site out in Wilton that's from the ESB that has been agreed for transfer, which we've already done a good bit of pre-planning work, as have we done on a site out in Kilbarry that's currently owned by the IDA, which we hope to transact on actually in the next 6 weeks or so. So 110 hectares in total there, which is very significant, and they're at various stages of development, various stages of potential, but our objective would be to hopefully engage with the market, engage with local stakeholders to get affordable housing delivered on those in a coherent way as possible and as quickly as possible. So when I mean affordable housing, what am I talking about? I keep thinking about this in terms of deciles of income, and the graph here sets out household income deciles, and roughly from a rental perspective, we're trying to target about 1/3 of net monthly income for people. So roughly speaking, the top 3 deciles can pay their own way. The bottom 3.5 are generally covered by social housing, for better or for worse. And then it's the middle 3 that you tend to qualify for everything or nothing in from a housing perspective. And so it's the middle 3 that are struggling to find affordable housing options in the private sector is what we're targeting. An example of our nearest term development in terms of what does that actually mean for people. So Changana is the closest one in South Dublin that we have at the moment, and the 2-bed apartment, I said €1,800 here. I challenge anyone to find something less than 2,000 a month that will be comparable. Is, as we've seen on the previous slide, just not affordable for the vast majority of people, particularly in that middle income sector. So we're targeting around €1,300 a month for that, which would be a fair discount on market. So it's really to land it in that sweet spot of 1/3 of the middle thirds net household income is where we're trying to get to. And our vision for an affordable housing sector would be to utilize state lands. And in Dublin and Cork, our requirement is through the LDA Act for 100% of housing to be devoted towards social or mainly affordable housing. We also want to secure land from local authorities by working in partnership with them. But also more laterally, we want to engage with house builders to see, is there a way that we can help you unlock some of those viability issues by working with you to finance or fund or JV to deliver affordable homes. So that will create a kind of consolidated affordable home sector in the country that we can have a coherent operating structure on, and to release those homes as either cost rental or affordable rental or for affordable purchase. There's a lot of challenges, and again, Thomas touched on these, and the Chamber has been very proactive and forthright in highlighting some of the commercial viability challenges that exist. The reality is the market and commercial developers are a pretty logical bunch. They would be delivering if it was viable, if it was possible to make a reasonable profit. The reality is it's not happening for a number of reasons, and there are a number of challenges and reasons behind that. Delivery costs obviously been number one, and the planning system over the medium term been a big inhibitor. How do we overcome those challenges? I think the LDA utilizing some of those lands that I pointed to will be be able to play a significant role in helping overcome those challenges. We will probably take a longer term view than a commercial developer in terms of viability. So we'd be less focused on return, more focused on delivery perhaps. So I think the LDA in time can play that role. I think we're going to get off to a good start on St. Kevin's, but what we've been asking ourselves of late is, well, look, it's great to have St. Kevin's, and it's great to have Kilbarry and Wilton, and the longer term kind of strategic areas like Tivoli and the Cork Docklands. But is there a way that we can tap into existing planning permissions or people that are on the ground already to help affordable housing get delivered? So what we've done last week is to launch a project called Project Tusig, which I touched on at the outset. So what we're saying here is, can we get into partnerships with developers to fund developers to deliver housing on the lands that they have access to, that they have planning permissions for, that the LDA would then release to the market either as affordable rental or affordable for purchase housing. I think in apartment typologies in the city centre and the brownfield areas, they would be probably rental. So that cost rental model that I outlined in the Shangana example is what we'd be targeting. And I think something's got to give here. We have to overcome these obstacles. And just looking at Daft this morning, trying to find an apartment in Cork City Centre, I think there were 26 available, which just highlights how chronic the issue is. So rather than waiting for the good work that we'll hopefully do on the longer term stuff, what we're saying to developers is, if you have planning consented or near planning consented sites that you could benefit from working in partnership with us through funding or otherwise, to come talk to us and to see what we can do to get your sites going. So that's a process that we've just launched. It will evolve in phases over the next couple of months, and we're hoping to target the delivery of 5,000 homes. The interesting thing is with this that we don't necessarily want to target PRS, which is pretty prevalent in Dublin. So I think the opportunity in Cork is probably more significant even to try and make a difference there, particularly in the core city areas. So we're hopeful and optimistic that we can make a difference there. And it's not just us. I mean, the AHBs are targeting affordable rental as well, local authorities in the affordable space too. So I think there's a number of state initiatives that where we can work with the private sector to get delivery going in the shorter term. And how we'll do that, what's different with us is we just take a longer term view on viability and look at it from a different lens to hopefully get that catalytic development going. So that's it from me. I hope that just gave you a flavour of the LDA, what we're targeting the affordable housing space, our efforts to try and accelerate things, and specifically what that might mean in Cork. Thanks very much.
Okay, John, thank you. That was really interesting, and it's been really positive, I think, to see the progress made since 2019, effectively, when you were stood up and you've got a board in place and you're starting to build out the organization. I suppose what many on the call here would be looking towards, that are the timeframes and impact, and what can be done to address some of those. And look, to be fair, towards the end there, you did recognize all of those challenges that are out there. What I suppose maybe to ask you, if you had opportunity and you had ultimate influence from a political perspective and so on, what are the couple of things that really need to happen so that, you know, those partnerships with the private sector, if that's an element of it, that happens, that, you know, even the transfer of state lands that are in the ownership of other bodies and other agencies, even that moving through the system to end up on the LDA books, I see that as being challenging, problematic. You know, what would you say to some of those points?
Yeah. So if we had a carte blanche, what would we do? I think like the way from a timing perspective, Conor, the way we are looking at Cork is the way we're looking at everywhere else. So like what many people will know in the development sector and beyond is that fundamentally it takes a very long time to bring stuff through from raw land and plans to delivery and into fruition. And for strategic areas, that could be 20 years delivery time frame or longer. And not to commence delivery, but to have them, say, you know, one example across the water for me here, where I sit at the moment, is the Dublin Docklands, which probably took 20-25 years to come to fruition. So the challenge for us is trying to deliver in the nearer term, and of course we can get on state-owned sites. The biggest, the easiest way is through state-owned bodies like the HSE that the government controls, that can instruct to transfer lands to us, like for instance St. Kevin's. That's at the easiest end of the scale. The more difficult end of the scale is where you have commercial state bodies such as the Port of Cork that have legitimate operations on these locations, and that, you know, while housing of course is our urgent need of our times, there are legitimate other essential services that are going on these areas at the moment, albeit in Tivoli's case planned for movement in the longer term. So they are the challenges. What I've noticed in the past year, really since the minister came into office, is an increased level of urgency and an increased level of willingness to make a decision. So in Housing for All, on these lands transfers, which have to happen sometimes, I viewed Housing for All as a window whereby we could have our say in terms of those big moves, and there were, most of them were included that we sought and that we asked for. So that window. And that the urgent need that we have today has created that opportunity for us to gain access to those land transfers. So there's resolute support from the government to make those happen, and I would consider it a government decision that is in existence.
Okay, and obviously you touched yourself on the planning system and the challenges, and there certainly are government commitments around reviewing, but I think that is a major issue, whether it's across housing or pretty much any level of significant development at the moment is impacted by the planning system.
It is. Look, it's a problem, Conor. There's no two ways about it. So what are the impediments for the LDA to deliver? It's speed. It's how do we get on site? How do we get visible delivery happening quickly? And it's a subset of that is the planning system. So we've an application that some interesting stats. Actually, we had a planning expert come to our board there recently, and you currently still have to use the SHD approach for anything over 100 units. And the startling statistic we heard from that was of the 65 or so SHD applications so far this year, 1/3 of them have been refused by the board, which is up from about 16% in 2019, 20% in 2020. And then if you take that a step further, so 2/3 get approved. Of those 2/3 that got approved, about 2/3 of those were JR'd, and JRs have a greater than 90% success rate in quashing the application. So we have a situation where you have roughly a 1 in 4 chance of getting an implementable planning application through the system. Now, as someone that's responsible for getting implementable planning applications up and running, that's a big problem.
Yeah,
and not just for me, but for the development sector. So I think it is on the government's agenda, it's on the minister's agenda in terms of judicial review reform and trying to find the balance between the right of a citizen to look into the decision of a public body and also to get homes delivered. I think is going to be critical. So we're pushing hard on that on our end.
Yeah, no, that's I think very fair point. The chat box is quiet, but I think the number of people we have on the call, I think we can probably even go to a hands up or anyone wanting to comment there. Ger O'Mahony, I see you're looking to come in. You were nodding vigorously there to some of those points. Ger, you have two hats on today, I suppose, with PwC, but also as chair of the Cork Development Forum. Ger, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Conor, and hi, John. It's interesting. We have in our next Cork Development Forum meeting, it's a single item agenda to deal with housing and specifically what you called out there around the availability of apartments within the city or in the wider environments. It's a really small amount of availability, and that's been pretty acute for the last period of time. So my question or challenge is, given that we've all been talking about this for the last period of time, and I can go back almost 10 years when we raised this first with housing and finance departments, what do we need to do collectively now to accelerate it? Because we're at that crossroads where we have a couple of 100 acres within our city centre environments or in the wider environments which are available for development, yet we can't get them out of the starting blocks, and we have the viability issue around that. So I'm very interested in what you were saying about the affordability part, affordable rental, because I think that will help. But I'm not sure that on its own is necessarily going to get us there. So interested in your views on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the affordability piece is a slightly different way to look at it. So if you look at it, that at the moment, developers and house builders, they're selling into, if you think about it, someone explained it to me like a pint of Guinness. So the creamy bit at the top is the market for house builders at the moment that they're able to sell into, but the black bit underneath that is the belly of the market that they can't access. So it's a huge untapped market that either can't access finance or can't meet the delivery costs. So that's the challenge. And what we're trying to do with the affordable housing space is to open up that market for house builders to access. So the challenges to that, set aside the planning system for the moment, is clearly viability. And viability is getting worse by the day because we've already high rental levels and we've increasing costs that are coming at us, somewhat hopefully temporary because of COVID, but I suspect they're not going away anytime soon, is my sense of it. So how do you match increasing costs against an already very challenging viability issue? And I think something does have to give in a big way. I think tweaks won't mean that much. So I think ultimately what we're looking for is some sort of subvention. As Thomas outlined there, there's a couple of ways to look at subvention. There's land subvention, which essentially the LDA has because its land will transfer to it at relatively nil or nominal cost. That's for the LDA. Then other subventions that might be available. I mean, it's branded Cree Cunaha, but essentially that's money that's just put towards development costs to make the apartments viable. So I know the chamber pieces of work advocated other subventions such as tax, and maybe looking at why is it that we have zero rated VAT in the UK, for instance, on building, and that VAT has to be passed on to the renter in Cork or in Dublin. So things like that's just another form of subvention if that was looked at. So I think the path to travel here, you're starting to see it with some of the initiatives coming through, and some level of subvention will probably be needed in the short term to unlock viability.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ger. Thomas, you have a hand up there as well. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Conor. Just two questions, John. You know, we both spoke about the viability and the 2040 brownfield targets. Do you think that they are attainable based on the current level of viability in the market? I think that's, as I said, the ideology behind them is without question, but it's just whether or not they can actually be delivered on is one question. And a second question, which is unrelated, is how embedded in is the LDA into the government, the wider government machine? Would you have any concerns about future government composition or any future political direction of travel?
Just on the first question, Thomas. So I think the challenges in the brownfield, and from a lot of people that I know in the sector, might say that, well, look, you've almost overnight come with a policy that says there has to be development in the brownfield areas. And fundamentally, there are a lot of challenges with that. So on the remediation of lands, on the servicing of them, on the decontamination, which we know is going to be an issue in ESB, in Marina for sure, Tivoli Docks, absolutely. So while a policy decision can be made that is implementable on day zero, the reality is some of the challenges, including the readiness of the land, but also viability, are going to take a long time to sort out. So, I mean, some of the things, set aside the viability issue, or the infrastructure and the delivery issue to support denser development in the city areas, you have the fundamental high cost issue, which impacts on viability as well. So I think I would have a sympathy for anyone trying to build homes in brownfield areas, and the challenges that exist in trying to make that happen in the very short term. And I know policy and climate change has to push us in this direction, but I think a graduated approach might be the way to think about it going forward, because we need homes as well. And just because we say development should happen somewhere, it doesn't mean that it will. The second point, in terms of the viability over the long term and how we'd fit in with government plans, look, obviously the main opposition at the moment, our sense of it is that fundamentally if they were in government, I think the LDA would be a useful tool for them. They have supported the LDA's role as a strategic land manager, land assembly body. So the strategic stuff, the Tivoli Docks, the Cork Docklands, that sort of stuff, they're satisfied with that. There's a need for that. Their focus would be on empowering local authorities to deliver in the short term, rather than having a centralized agency like the LDA, would be my understanding. But I think if I was to talk to anyone that might take power in the future, I'd be saying that, look, we're not in competition with the local authorities. We're not instead of the local authorities. We're here to enable and empower and fund and provide services to the local authorities, just like any other service provider would. So I think there would be a sensible position that we could adopt that might be suitable for everyone's agenda.
Yeah. Okay, John, thank you. That was really interesting. It has incredibly crept up to 1 p.m. All of a sudden, so we're going to have to draw to a close. But John, on everyone's behalf here, thank you for your time this afternoon. I suppose if nothing else, it was very useful to get a full understanding of the breadth and range of focus of the LDA. But equally, I think it's important that there's an understanding of some of the challenges there, and I suppose we're particularly focused on a number of those that you highlighted in terms of as a Chamber of Commerce engaging with government to help you in terms of some of those impediments being moved on as well. So we'll continue to do that, and we appreciate the collaborative and cooperative support we have from you and your colleagues as well. So John, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks very much, Conor.
Okay,
thanks all.
And everybody else, thank you also. It's been I hope you found that of use, and as well as Thomas' update as well, and we'll continue to keep you updated by email, and with some further publications coming out to you over the next number of weeks. Also, I very much hope we can have our next Thought Leader Council session in Q1 in person. Here's hoping. I've said it before, but one of these days we'll get there. But for today, listen, thank you all for your support. Thank you for joining with us today, and thank the team as well for putting together and turning it around from being a physical in-person event into an online version over 60 minutes today. So thank you all. Have a good day. Bye bye.